Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my first webinar. Fingers crossed the technology is going to work, but so far it has. We have several people who are with us already and a few more who are expecting over the next few minutes. Um, it's from what I'm seeing, it's got me as being in Dagenham in the United Kingdom, which I can assure you I'm not. I'm in London in Limehouse, and I have just heard the church bells go in stereophonic sound, which tells me that it's 6 o'clock in London. So I'm thrilled to be doing this webinar. So many people have been telling me that it's something that I should do, but for various reasons, I was put off by the technology or because I was busy doing other stuff. Anyway, this opportunity has come and I'm going to seize it. You, in front of your screen, you should have a little text box where you can send me a message. So if you are having any problems, you can't hear my voice or can't see my picture, then please let me know. And of course, this is an interactive session as far as it can be. Um, so I've just, here we are, there's another question coming here. Oh, Andrea, hello. You're interested in a question on law of attraction, and yeah, I'm sure we can certainly talk about that. So let's get on. One question that was posted earlier, which I'm going to address first, because quite frankly, even if that question wasn't there, I would have probably talked about it anyway, because this is a webinar about luck. Most of you seem to have come across my books or videos before, so you know the kind of things that I talk on. But I'm not going to take that for granted, and I'll keep myself pretty firmly fixed on some simple strategies that we can all use to attract more luck into our life, which of course is the whole idea. Controversial statement that I say at the start of all of my talks. Well, maybe it's not controversial, but I am firmly convinced from the research that I've done that luck is not random and that we do not live in a random universe. So what do I mean by that? Well, there are just some things that successful people or people that we might call lucky, there are some things that they do and that we may not do, or we may not do it as well as we could do. So those are the things that I look at. And in my book that I mentioned, which is Get Lucky Now, The 7 Secrets of Lucky People, I could have written this book about 1,000 secrets because there's even more than that. But nobody would have read it. And if it was that complicated, I wouldn't have written it either. So 7 is about the most things that I can deal with and probably most people can deal with. And 6 of these things, actually, they are logical. So that's really why I can say with a degree of certainty that I believe that luck is not random, because these are things that will bring more luck into your life, or more opportunities, or whatever words you want to use for that. Anyway, so back to our first question now. And this is from a lady who says she's looking for tips for staying in the moment. It would be helpful with my golf. Well, I've got some news for you. I'm sure that it would be helpful with your golf, but it would be helpful with everything else as well in your life. And that's why it's a good place to start, because a lot of people aren't interested in golf. Well, you don't need to be, but you will have heard of this expression of staying in the moment or staying in the now. So what does it mean? That's probably the first thing we should have a look at. Well, I can't switch on a sports program without hearing some pundit saying how important it is that you are in the moment. But I haven't really heard very many people, if any, actually say what that means, or how we can be in the moment. I mean, in London, we've just had the Wimbledon Championships, and Roger Federer has won his record, I think it's 18th Wimbledon title, or is it 8th? It's going to be 8th, I think. But whatever, however many it is, he is a fantastic role model. In fact, a few years ago, I was commissioned to write a feature article about him in a glossy magazine, and I did so with pleasure, because he's a man who definitely knows how to stay in the moment. But interestingly, even then, when I wasn't didn't really have the interest and passion I have for luck, when I wrote this article, I do remember one of the things that I said, because he was being interviewed, I think by Sue Barker on TV, and she was asking him, you know, when he's in these impossible situations or he looks like he's going to lose a game or a set, he pulls something out of the bag. She said, "Well, how do you do it, Roger?" And he said, "Well, I guess I just put luck on my side." Well, he was talking in a second language, so I'm not quite sure what he meant by that, but I have a feeling that I do know, because he knows there's a place in his mind where the magic works and the luck kicks in. So back to the question, looking for tips for staying in the moment. Well, that actually is one of the seven secrets in my book. I don't word it quite like that. I think I mentioned it as mindfulness, because mindfulness is a word that we're increasingly hearing. It's a good word, and its mindfulness programs are being rolled out in schools and in hospitals and even in prisons. That I'm so I hear. And how can one become mindful? Just like how can one stay in the moment? Well, you can go on courses. I've heard of people spending weeks or even months on courses, but it's not as difficult as that, because this is one of my seven secrets. And in all of the other secrets, I say, well, these are things that we have to do, things that we might not have done before, or we're going to do them in a different way. But staying in the moment is different, because that's the one thing where I say you don't actually have to do anything, which should make it about the easiest thing in the world to do. But the trouble is that we don't like not doing anything at all. We prefer to have some kind of mission. So let me explain a little more what I mean by that. I'll use the analogy of a baby. We've all studied babies at different ages, and gosh, how they change so quickly. But the age that I'm particularly interested in babies is when their brain is really starting to form. They're starting to make some connections. So they're quite young, but they're beginning to understand this crazy place they've been parachuted down into. And the thing that I notice about babies of that age is the intensity of their stare. They just look at you and their eyes are fixed and their pupils are dilated. And that look lasts a very long time, because they're absorbing everything they can. They're in the moment. Their focus is just on one thing. If it's your face, it's your face, or it might be something else that's in their environment they'll be staying at. And another example is a cat, or it can be a domestic cat, or it could be a tiger. But when you watch those in your home or on TV, when they're stalking a prey, they have very much the same intensity of expression. They are really staring at what is interesting them. In this case, it may well be food. Sports people are the same if they're in the moment. You can tell they have this slightly glazed look when you see them on TV. And that's a pretty good clue that they're in the moment and that they're likely to do well. Compare that to the sports people we see on TV, whose eyes are going everywhere, whose bodies are going everywhere. They are struggling to keep focused. So if we can be like the baby, that's all we have to do. There is actually one another thing we have to do. Um, we have to look around our environment and see, well, what are the things that are taking me away from my natural state of being a mindful person? What could they possibly be? Well, you won't have to look too far. And quite a few of them will have a logo on them of an apple that somebody's taken a big bite out of. Now, Apple make wonderful products, and my house is full of them. And I'm using my Mac computer right now for this webinar. But all of the stuff that they design, which makes our lives easier, also makes us more dependent upon them. I was having a conversation with somebody about GPS systems the other day, And he doesn't use it because he said he'd started to use GPS, and he realized that when his GPS wasn't working, he didn't know how to navigate, he didn't know how to find his way when he's driving his car. Well, there's some truth in that because we're all born with a navigation center inside us. Because we don't really use it, it dies away. Like all the things in our mind or in our brain we don't use, it will die away. But if we do use it, then it can grow. So there's an example of a distraction that takes us away from mindfulness. So if you've got text messages coming up on your computer right now, they're going to momentarily distract you. And I've got some messages coming in front of me, which I'm looking out of in the corner of my eye, but I'm staying pretty much focused on what I have to say. But if you're doing, my advice to anybody to be mindful is switch these things off. If you're working on a project and you know it's going to take you half an hour, or even half a day, if possible, switch off all your gadgets that make pinging noises, and that would be a good step to becoming mindful. So, the lady who wrote in about her golf, there we are, some tips for staying in the moment. Good news for you is you don't have to do anything. Just enjoy yourself and don't think of the past because the past is history. And the things in the past that you'll probably be thinking about are the things you shouldn't think of, like how you played this hole last time when you were here and you went in the water 10 times. I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. And I wouldn't think about the future either. If you're playing a great round of golf, if you have thoughts like, well, this could be a personal best, I could win this tournament, I wonder what I'm going to say in my winner's speech. Bad news is, sorry, your wheels are probably going to come off your game of golf in the near future if you carry on thinking about that. So just stay in the moment. And if you get any of these thoughts, what can you do? Well, be like the baby, absorb the environment that you're in. Golf courses are usually in pretty nice parts of the world, so there's lots of lovely things to see. There's usually probably birds flying all over the place. See how many birds you can spot, but don't take your mind off the golf. So there we are. There's a chapter, an example straight out of my book, Mindfulness. And I got another question here. So this is the one that I referenced at the beginning of this webinar. From Andrea. I know who Andrea is. Thanks for coming along, Andrea. Having read the book and seen certain similarities with the law of attraction. Yeah, I think I probably mentioned that somewhere, probably in the final chapter, which is where we talk about magic. Couldn't think what word to use there. I'm interested in exploring how they could be used in a complementary fashion. Well, there are some similarities. Now, let me just start by saying what I understand by the law of attraction. The law of attraction is that where we put our mind, where we put our focus, is what we're going to get. In fact, funnily enough, I didn't know this question was coming, but I went on a little walk by the River Thames earlier this afternoon before this thing, and I was thinking about the secret. Ask, believe, and receive. Because there was another quote. Now, let me think if I can get this one. Yeah, this is the quote, 3 words. This is the quote that really resonated with me. And I mentioned it in a video I made several years ago. And it was one of the speakers saying, thoughts become things. So with what I know and think now, I would have a few caveats on that, but I still think it's a pretty good place to start in life. There's another great book that people often reference called Think and Grow Rich, written by Napoleon, somebody, the name is escaping, Napoleon Hill, I think, in the 1930s. He was living in the US. The US was, of course, going through this terrible depression. And that's probably one of the reasons why his book sold so well, and it still is, long after he's dead, 65 million copies. So when 65 million people buy a book, it's usually worth reading. But he said very similar things. So another word that you'll have heard of here is visualization. If you haven't got a picture in your head, and that's even, funnily enough, that even is the same if you're a blind person. If you haven't got a picture in your head, it makes you less likely to get whatever it is that you want. It's no use just saying, I want more money, because money is just a word. There has to be a picture with it. And that means that, that asks you another question. What do you want more money for? What are you going to use it for? And if you say, well, I want to buy a new car. Okay, well, then have the picture of the car. The money's just something that you exchange and you get a new car, or the holiday you want to go on, or the school you want to send your kids to, whatever it might be. Money is to be used for things. Um, Not much point having money in the bank, um, unless you're saving for a rainy day, of course. But just on its own, it's not a good reason for having money. So Helen, let me read this question again and see. Law of attraction. Yeah, we've talked about law of attraction. I think it's good. Ask, believe, receive. Um, so asking is knowing what you want. That's pretty important. That's goals. That's chapter 1 in my book. Ask, believe. It helps to believe, but I'm not sure that you have to. Not sure that you do. Can't do any harm. And very often you'll get a feeling, and that's called intuition. And if I could describe my book, Lucky Now, in one word, it would be intuition, because that's what this book will help you to do. There will be, and staying in the moment, we mentioned earlier as an example of that. Staying in the moment allows calm and quiet for the unconscious mind to speak. The unconscious mind is usually right. So the belief thing there is, if you think you're going to do something, then yeah, that could be the intuition, and go with it. I work with professional sports people, amongst others, and particularly at the moment with professional poker players. So you can imagine, if you know anything about poker, we talk about intuition about a lot, because the whole thing in poker is not so much the cards that you've got, but what cards you think the other person's got, and you can't see them, so you have to guess. You have to look at that person, or look at their body language or something, or get a feeling. And the player that I work with, Chris Moorman, who's the world #1 in online poker, and pretty good in events poker as well, he has pretty good intuition. And he, if he goes against his intuition, as he did a couple of weeks ago, uh, he will kick himself, because his first thought is usually his best thought. But there's no point kicking yourself. Whatever you do, that's history. Just take it as a learning and move on. So, Andrea, I've gone around your question in a couple of different ways. I think some of my methods are complementary. I think they fit largely with the law of attraction, and I'm sure that they will hold you in good stead. So we have time for another question or two, if anybody wants to ask. So I'll give you a minute or so to think about that. But if not, I'll wrap this up. We've been talking for about 20 minutes now. And I think mindfulness, staying in the moment, and an introduction to magic. I can actually say another thing about, here we are. The question has just come in. What is the one thing you wish you'd known earlier? Angela, I have a feeling we know you as well, but I won't mention any of your names on any more details here, but welcome anyway. What is the one thing you wish you'd known earlier? Well, you know what? 10 years ago, that's when I started becoming a mind coach. I was a pretty orthodox medical doctor then, orthodox or ordinary, if you include working for 7 years in Angola during the Civil War as being ordinary, which I suppose it wasn't, and some of the other places that I went to as well. So what's the one thing I wish I'd known? I wish I'd known how powerful our unconscious mind is. I mean, even most doctors, they don't get very much training in this kind of stuff. So you'd probably expect me to know all about it before, but I didn't. I knew there was an unconscious mind, and we'd had a bit of teaching about Freud as medical students, and we thought he was crazy, and that was probably as far as our thoughts went. But now I know that if you can live in your unconscious mind, which is a bit more, more of the mindfulness type thing, then life gets just so much easier. You have this massive engine behind you that you don't need to think about. I mean, you don't need to think about controlling your blood pressure, do you? No, this is all taken care of. And a lot of the stuff that we worry about, we don't need to worry about it. The unconscious mind will take care of it. So there, Angela, um, that's a quick answer to that one. I've got another comment coming now. Oh, just Andrea, thanks for my explanation about law of attraction. So hopefully she's got what she wanted. Um, the other thing that I might just say before I wrap up is I'm always putting videos on YouTube, and the last two I found pretty interesting. I found them pretty tough to make and took me a lot longer than I thought. But they were prompted because one of the colleagues that I work with, uh, Hugh Shields, he's written a book and it's called A Dinner with, no, it's called Hawking and Einstein Go to Dinner. And it's an imaginary conversation they might have talking about the stuff that they're well known for. And Hugh and I are pretty interested in Einstein. He features in my book quite a lot. And we actually have a speaking tour. So you might want to check out those videos because there's some interesting things in there. So we've survived our first webinar, which is great. The technology worked. I can tell from your comments that your technologies worked as well. So I will be doing these regularly. So you'll see them announced. I do hope you'll be able to come. You will have the opportunity of posting your questions before, if you wish, and I'll make sure that I give some thought to it. But in the meantime, I wish you all lots and lots of luck. Remember that there are things you can all do to attract more luck into your life. And remember that whatever you want in terms of resources is probably already inside you. You don't know where to find it at the moment. Well, that's why we have these chats. So until then, may the luck flow and may it also infect those people around you in a very good way. Thanks for coming. Goodbye.